Part 28. The Prince is Very Fierce. Author, Guan Zi. Chapter 271. In the early morning, there was a gentle breeze in the pavilion. Su Buling closed his eyes and sat cross-legged in concentration, still carefully sorting out the relationship that was constantly being sorted out and messed up. Due to the basic recovery of martial arts, the sense of ears and eyes has also returned to its peak. In addition, the palace of Prince Su is very quiet, and the wind and grass in a radius of 100 meters can basically be heard clearly. Rustling. When the morning light first appeared, the sound of clothes rubbing together came from a room in the back house. Su Buling's ears twitched slightly and he listened carefully, and the whispers came. "Manzi, get up, the quilt has been pushed to the ground." "Well, Sister Daning, it's just dawn, let's sleep a little longer." "Manzi, you're not young anymore. You don't sleep well at night. You hug me and rub against each other." "Hee, Sister Daning's body is so soft, especially her breasts, which are very comfortable when used as pillows. It would be a shame to become a monk. Why don't you return to secular life?" "Oh, you can continue to sleep, I have something to go out." The words paused, leaving only the sound of getting dressed. Su Buling opened his eyes, thought for a while, stood up and waited in the corridor. After a moment, Ning Yuhi, who had finished washing and dressing up, walked out of the corridor, wearing a black robe, a curtain hat, and a long sword in his hand. Seeing Su Buling standing with his hands behind his back at the end of the corridor, Ning Yuhi blinked, walked behind and whispered, "Your Majesty, are you up so early?" Su Buling turned around, nodded and chuckled, "Yes, Master is ready to go out." Ning Yuhi smiled and looked at the sky. The Dragon Boat Festival is coming soon, and Empress Kui passed away during the Dragon Boat Festival. I can't repay the kindness of saving her life, so I can only go to pay homage, and then return after paying homage. Chang Qingguan, maybe I will come to see you next year. Su Buling thought for a moment. The mausoleum of Queen Kui is not far away. I will accompany Master to go there and take a look. Ning Yuhi naturally did not refuse, and walked out of the palace side by side with Su Buling. Su Buling summoned the wind-chasing horse, turned over and climbed up, tilting his head with a calm expression. "My horse should be faster, how about I take Master over?" Ning Yuhi blinked. She was not crazy. A Taoist nun could not sit in the arms of her disciple. He shook his head immediately and borrowed a horse from the palace guard. When Su Buling saw this, he naturally didn't force it, and headed to the eastern suburbs outside the city with his horse under his belly. The journey is about 20 miles, and it will take some time for the horse to gallop, so the journey on the road is quite boring. Ning Yuhi had something hidden in his heart, and finally found a chance to be alone with Su Buling, so he moved the horse a little closer and whispered, "Your Majesty." Su Buling slowed down his horse and turned his head. "What's wrong, Master?" Ning Yu's eyes were a little strange under his hat. He looked around to make sure there was no one else on the official road, and then said softly, "Were you going to detoxify that night, e-book?" This detoxification bite is very hard, and it obviously has other meanings. Su Buling and Ning Yuhi explained the whole process of detoxification, so they naturally understood it and coughed slightly in embarrassment. "Well, the dragon-locking goo is more powerful in summer, so I have to detoxify it. I have no choice but to blame it, Master." Ning Yuhi had already figured out the whole story, and did not show any disgust or embarrassment at this time. He walked forward and said softly, "Before life and death, all things are equal. When it comes to matters of urgency, authority cannot control etiquette and rules. Naturally, I won't blame you. How is the detoxification going?" Su Buling's expression turned awkward. He looked away and said seriously, "Not bad." Ning Yuhi nodded, hesitated, and then persuaded, "Your Majesty, there are crouching tigers and hidden dragons in the imperial city. Although Changal Palace is far away from the Tai Chi Palace and the harem, there are some masters after all. You run to the Queen Mother at night, to detoxify. Be careful, if you are caught, the Queen Mother's 1,000-year reputation will be completely ruined by you. Su Buling nodded slightly. I have already figured out the secret whistle in Changal Palace. If there are any changes, the Queen Mother will tell me in advance so that no one will notice. Ning Yuhi nodded, walked in front of Su Buling, was silent for a while, and suddenly said, Ling actually I have a problem that I haven't been able to figure out. The method you mentioned is to find the person who raises the poison or the person who raises the poison. The descendants of the descendants, the yin and yang are in harmony, and the body cannot detoxify until the essence is released. This should be regarded as an academic discussion. Su Buling had no shyness about it and nodded lightly. Yes, the secret method I got from the poison master in southern Xinjiang. Ning Yuhi nodded, frowning, and said, the Huainan Xiao family is spread all over the world. There are more than a dozen officials in the capital alone, and there are countless children. There are many official ladies who have not left the cabinet. Why do you choose? Are you looking for the Queen Mother? Su Buling shook his head and sighed. In Chang'an City, only the Queen Mother of the current dynasty is a direct descendant of the Xiao family. Etc. Ning Yuhi raised his hand and looked at Su Buling with a very serious frown. People are divided into legitimate concubines, but there is no bloodline. Regardless of whether they are concubines or legitimate children, the blood on their bodies is the same. The Queen Mother of the current dynasty is the granddaughter of the old family master Xiao, the youngest daughter of Xiao Lao Suban of Honglu Temple, and also the old family master Xiao. The granddaughter of Xiao Loxu is just a concubine, and her daughter's bloodline should be the same as that of the Queen Mother. Su Buling frowned, thought for a moment, and turned his head. Is there any other way to say this? Ning Yuhi nodded, walked up and explained patiently, the distinction between direct descendants and concubines is determined by humans, and the inheritance of bloodline is determined by heaven. Heaven and earth do not distinguish between high and low, they have always treated everyone equally. Ning Yuhi worked tirelessly to spread the knowledge of genetics to a time traveler. Su Buling took a breath and nodded, what the master said is reasonable. It seems that I was wrong in my preconceptions, but the Xiao family's locking dragon goo should have finally been passed on to the contemporary head of the family, Xiao Qi. The Queen Mother Yu Xiao Qi, they are sisters. Ning Yuhi raised his hand again, then you can go find Xiao Qi. She is a good match. Just ask Prince Su to propose marriage. It will be a legitimate detoxification. Su Buling thought for a moment, well, the Xiao family and the Su family are both important powerful families. Their marriage to each other will inevitably lead to many people's secret speculation. That's better than bullying the Queen Mother. The Queen Mother is the Holy Emperor's direct mother. Could it be possible that by marrying the Xiao family in Huainan, the consequences would be more serious than if the Holy Lord knew about your relationship with the Queen Mother? Ning Yuhi's eyes were very serious, full of suspicion that you are just greedy for the Queen Mother's body. Su Buling blinked, I finally found a way at that time, I didn't think so much. Ning Yuhi took a deep breath, shook his head and said, oh, I don't know what to say to you. That's all, the matter has come to this, you must not harm the Queen Mother. You must think twice before doing anything in the future. When you leave Chang'an, the Queen Mother will you have to be a widow in the palace. You are the son of the Lord, so naturally you don't take a woman seriously. But in the world, women who are deceived by heartless men will end up miserable. You must have compassion and never become that kind of person. Su Buling nodded lightly, accepting the master's reprimands and teaching seriously. He was about to say a few words to explain that he was not greedy for the Queen Mother's body, when his ears suddenly twitched, and his peripheral vision swept towards a small bamboo forest with overgrown weeds in front of the official road. The prince is very fierce. Author, Guan Guan Gong Zi. Chapter 272. The sun was blazing in the wilderness outside Chang'an City. There were pedestrians and caravans coming and going on the official road, including the occasional wolf guards. Su Buling and Ning Yuhi were going to the Queen Kui Mausoleum in the eastern suburbs, so they turned into a small road to the Queen's Mausoleum after 10 miles out of the city. The Queen's Mausoleum was near a low mountain, and the location was quite remote. There were no villages around. This road was also built specifically for worshipping at the Queen's Mausoleum. It was usually deserted. Su Buling listened to Ning Yuhi's instructions and rode a few steps ahead. When he walked to a small bamboo forest, he suddenly heard a subtle sound of click, click, click in the distance. Although the sound of horse hooves was noisy and the distance was relatively far, Su Buling still accurately captured this inaudible little sound from the many messy noises, and heard what made the sound, a strong bow. Su Buling was thrown to the border at the age of 10 and lived with the soldiers. He had heard the sound of the bow being fully drawn, and his ears were calloused. Just from this sound, he could tell that it was a 3-stone iron bow. 1 stone weighed 120 jin, and 3 stones weighed 360 jin. Those who could use a 3-stone bow were definitely good players, and they were the elite among the elite in the army. Su Buling was immediately alert, but he did not react. He did not even move his eyes. He only glanced at the small bamboo forest with his peripheral vision. It was 100 steps away, and the weeds were so overgrown that no one could be seen. However, after a careful look, he still saw the arrow painted black with ink in the gap between 2 bamboos. The arrow was facing him. Su Buling did not change his expression, as if he had not noticed anything. He continued to trot forward while talking to Ning Yuhi, while paying attention to the small arrow. At this time, the distance was still 80 steps. Most archers can shoot an arrow through a willow bark from 100 paces, but it is a pipe dream to shoot a martial arts expert to death from 100 paces away. Therefore, the opponent did not shoot the arrow, probably waiting for the distance to close. Su Buling clearly saw that the direction of the arrow was pointing to his heart, and he would die if he was hit. He was still a little confused about this. If the person behind the scenes attacked him, he would not be able to kill him. Could it be someone else who had a grudge against him? While thinking, the distance was shortened to 50 steps. Su Buling saw that the arrow moved slightly and turned to Ning Yuhi next to him. Seeing this scene, Su Buling immediately understood, they were here to find out his details. In this case, Su Buling naturally could not be exposed. He just rode his horse and rushed forward, waiting for the opponent to shoot Ning Yuhi, and then he chased him in anger, and then the poison took effect. Tap, tap, tap. The horse's hooves moved briskly, and soon they were 30 steps away. For the top martial arts masters, this distance was no different from face-to-face contact. At this moment, a whistling sound of an arrow breaking through the air suddenly came from the bamboo forest. Shua! The huge force of the 3-stone iron bow turned the black arrow into an invisible afterimage, pointing directly at Ning Yuhi's chest. Ning Yuhi was also a top master. He became alert after hearing the sound of the arrow breaking through the air. He did not hesitate at all, and did not even waste time looking at it with his eyes squinting. He quickly leaned back to avoid it. But the distance of 30 steps was too close. Ning Yuhi was talking to Su Buling with his head tilted, so he was naturally slack. He was caught off guard and dodged. Even if he could avoid the vital points, he could not escape unscathed. The arrow of the 3-stone strongbow had no arrowhead in the stone, which was enough to make a hole anywhere on the body. If there were no accidents, the arrow would have hit Ning Yuhi. Ning Yuhi could only forcefully turn his body away to avoid the heart, with a bit of fear in his eyes. At this moment, Su Buling, who was walking on the left side of Ning Yuhi, seemed to have just noticed it, with a look of astonishment on his face. He stepped on the stirrups without hesitation, and rushed out to block Ning Yuhi. 29 GG. Master. An anxious scolding. Ning Yuhi's eyes turned from fear to astonishment in an instant, and he looked at Su Buling, who was desperately blocking the arrow in disbelief. The white robe was blown up by the flying wind, and the anxiety and astonishment in the man's eyes fell into his eyes. This extremely short moment made Ning Yuhi understand one thing: he really regarded himself as a master. Or he had already regarded him as the closest person. No reason or purpose is needed. It is already like this in the subconscious mind, just like a father who sees his child fall or a husband who sees his wife fall into the water will reach out and grab them without hesitation. They don't care about their own lives, but only want to protect the people close to them. Swoosh! The arrow rushed over and was close in the blink of an eye. It was aimed at Ning Yuhi's chest. Su Buling rushed to the front and became Su Buling's back. If it was shot, it would be a piercing of the heart. Don't. At the moment when Su Buling pounced, Ning Yuhi cried out in a hurry, stepped on the stirrups with both feet, pounced forward, hugged Su Buling in the air, and forced Su Buling down. Squeak. Thump. Hiss. The horse neighed and raised its front hooves. The meteor-like arrow scratched a hole on Su Buling's shoulder and broke through the air, disappearing from sight. Ning Yuhi fell on the dirt road while holding Su Buling, and rolled several times. He didn't care that his Taoist robe was covered with dust, and he used his hands to support the ground to stop rolling. Ling-er. Ning Yuhi's face was pale, and he looked around anxiously. As soon as Su Buling fell to the ground, he gritted his teeth and forced his energy to force out the little dragon-locking goo in his body. After rolling several times, his face was twisted and livid. At this time, veins on Su Buling's forehead bulged, and he looked like he had forced chi movement, causing the dragon-locking poison to take effect. The skin wound on his shoulder had dyed the right shoulder red. He held Ning Yuhi tightly with his left hand to block her by his side, and looked at the bamboo forest with angry eyes while coughing violently. "Who are you?" Cough, cough, cough. After coughing hard a few times, he finally forced out some poisonous blood, and his face was hideous and furious. Ning Yuhi was held so hard that she couldn't breathe. She didn't care about the ambush, and anxiously pointed at the swaying branches in the woods. "Where is it? I'll chase him." Seeing the blood on Su Buling's shoulder, he was in a panic and tried to press the wound. Su Buling finally met a thug behind the scenes, so he naturally couldn't let it go. He made an angry posture and ran towards the bamboo forest. Unfortunately, after he broke through the bamboo forest and came to the place where the arrows were shot, there was only a corpse on the ground, with a feather arrow stuck in the back of his neck, and he fell to the ground dead. While Su Buling coughed, he carefully searched the surroundings with his ears. The arrow behind the assassin's neck was shot from 100 steps away. The person who was really observing him had long lost his trace. Su Buling took out the wine pot from his waist and took 2 sips. He pretended to be in agony and squatted down to look at the body on the ground. He was dressed in black and had no markings on his body. He must be a death warrior who was arranged to come. He swallowed a poison pill when he was shot by the arrow. It seemed that in order to prevent him from catching him and asking for information, he was extremely cautious and could not have left any clues. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. The prince is very fierce. Author, Guan Guan Gong Zi. Chapter 273. Since the person sent was a dead soldier and had been silenced, there must be no clues to trace. Su Buling gave up the idea of searching, fearing that someone was hiding in the dark and watching, so he stood up and coughed a few times, swaying, looking like he couldn't support himself. Ning Yuhi ran over and followed behind to keep an eye on the surroundings. Seeing Su Buling crumbling, his face became anxious and he quickly supported Su Buling's body. "Your Majesty, you..." "I'm fine. Su Buling wiped the blood from the corner of his mouth and staggered out. It's not a good place to stay for a long time. Let's go quickly. Just now Su Buling sacrificed his life to block the arrow, and the iceberg hidden in Ning Yuhi's heart was shattered. At this time, without thinking, he hugged Su Buling's waist hard and hugged the tall Su Buling directly. Got up. Su Buling was stunned for a moment, thought about it, but did not refuse. Ning Yuhi took 2 long steps and jumped onto the wind-chasing horse. He held Su Buling in his arms and galloped towards Chang'an City, while carefully paying attention to the movements in front, back and left. Su Buling was held tightly in Ning Yuhi's arms, and his head was almost squeezed into the skirt of his clothes to protect him. The light fragrance hit him, and he was a little out of breath. I finally understood why Manzi said he felt very comfortable. Cough. There was something wrong with his posture. Su Buling was a little embarrassed, and he turned his cheek slightly, but was directly pushed back by Ning Yuhi, who was paying close attention to his surroundings. In the hot summer, the Taoist robe is light and thin, and there is only a belly band underneath. You can clearly feel the heat and slight bulges of the skin, and you can even hear the rapid heartbeat. Thump 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 thump. Su Buling's expression was extremely strange and he could only cough twice and muffled. Master, you want to suffocate me to death. Ning Yuhi didn't have time to listen at all. He kept his horse running and paid attention to the surrounding movements. The wind-chasing horse was very fast. He ran for more than 2 miles in the blink of an eye. After arriving at the edge of the relatively empty field with nowhere to hide, he calmed down a little. He glanced down. Eyes facing each other. Ning Yuhi's face blushed imperceptibly, and he quickly let go of his arm, letting go of his apprentice who was about to be suffocated to death. His expression was not strange, but he just looked at Su Buling's wounds. Ling is your poison okay? Su Buling sat up and didn't know what to say. He turned around and rode on the horse chasing the wind. With his back to Ning Yuhi, he picked up the wine bottle and took a big sip. It's okay, I can still bear it. Ning Yuhi secretly breathed a sigh of relief and sat close to Su Buling's back, looking right at the wound on Su Buling's shoulder. The arrow just grazed his shoulder, and the skin injury was not serious, but a lot of blood flowed, staining the snow-white robe red. Ning Yuhi pursed his lips, and hurriedly raised his hand and tore open his robe, revealing half of his strong shoulders. He took Su Buling's wine bottle and washed it on the wound. The burning sting of strong alcohol came. Su Buling's expression remained unchanged. He bent over and took out the golden sore medicine from the skin bag on the horse's side, and handed it to Ning Yuhi. It is common to get injured when walking around the world. Basically everyone knows how to bandage and stop bleeding. After Ning Yuhi cleaned the wound, it was still bleeding. She looked around. Normally, she would tear off a piece of her robe and use it as a bandage to tie the wound, but just now both of them were rolling on the dusty dirt road, their bodies dirty. Nowhere in Zixi is clean. In situations where life and death are at stake, Jianghu people generally don't pay attention to these things, but now that they are out of danger, it is obviously inappropriate to use a dirty robe to bandage the prince's son. Ning Yuhi took the medicine bottle and thought for a moment. Su Buling was riding a horse thinking about the purpose of the test, and didn't care at all about the slight pain on his shoulder. The powder was sprinkled on the wound on the shoulder, and then a hand came out from behind and tied the wound with a clean white cloth, with a white lotus embroidered on it. Su Buling thought it was something inside the handkerchief and didn't pay attention. He just chuckled and said, "I shawu. Thank you, master." After Ning Yuhi bandaged the wound, he straightened the skirt of the slightly open Taoist robe. Seeing that the wound was no longer bleeding, he breathed a sigh of relief. It's okay. He leaned forward slightly and looked at Su Buling's cheek from the side, still with a smile on his face. A bit bruised. Ning Yuhi thought for a moment, then took out the oil paper umbrella on the side of the horse, covered Su Buling's head, and said softly, "Ling You are too impulsive. Why do you want to block my arrow? You are the legitimate son of Prince Su. If something goes wrong, I can't even afford to pay for it with 100 lives. To help block the sun in front of him, he naturally stayed close to Su Buring, almost lying on Su Buring's back. Su Buling blinked and said softly. In desperation, I didn't think too much. Ning Yu he pursed his lips, wanting to teach him a few words of recklessness, but at this moment, he only felt warm and could not speak these words. After thinking about it for a while, he could only say in a soft voice. In this case, I, as the master, owe you 2 lives, but how can I pay you back? Su Buling shook his head and smiled. We are all one family, we have nothing to pay back. The horse galloped across the boundless wilderness, as if there were only 2 people and 1 horse in the world. Ning Yu he was sitting in the back. Because he was shorter than Su Buling, he kept looking up at Su Buling's profile. For some reason, his expression suddenly seemed a little dazed. When I was young, I also thought about riding a horse and wielding a sword to become a chivalrous girl. Traveling all over the country, suddenly one day, in a special place, I met a special person. Maybe we were doing something together, or maybe we were taking a boat together. Anyway, we met like that. That person was gentle, elegant, and handsome. He might be a scholar who didn't know martial arts, or he might be a knight with strong martial arts skills. He was kind-hearted and polite in conversation. He happened to take another look at her. Then it was like this, 2 people riding a horse, one holding an umbrella and the other holding the reins, traveling all over the world's great mountains and rivers, until one day they were tired of walking and returned to the place where they first met, the thatched hut and bamboo hut. 3 acres of fertile land, peaceful and quiet until the day I close my eyes. If it hadn't been for the marriage that changed her destiny, she would have thought about the unrestrained life that only belonged to people in the world. But there are no ifs in the world. Before she grew up, her path went astray, with ups and downs, and she finally arrived at Changqing Temple and became a Taoist nun who has cut off the world of mortals. After sitting in the Taoist temple for 10 years, she thought those childish thoughts were long gone, but for some reason, looking at the profile in front of her, she felt as if she had found this person. He is highly skilled in martial arts, gentle and handsome, and the most important thing is that he also has a chivalrous heart, and he is calm and calm. He will not bully the darkroom when facing her, the most beautiful woman in the world. Pity. Ning Yu he took a breath, shook his head and smiled. It's a pity that he came 10 years too late and became her apprentice. Maybe he shouldn't have been accepted as his apprentice, he even dared to. She escaped from the emperor's marriage. The only person in the world who dares to marry a woman like her is probably this lawless boy. The trapped dragon turns into rain, don't watch it. The trapped dragon turns into rain. For some reason, this hexagram before leaving flashed through his mind. Ning Yu he suddenly woke up and moved back to separate from Su Buling. There was a bit of surprise and panic in his eyes. What was Pandeo thinking? Yeah, I'm so frustrated that I'm going crazy, how is that possible? Master, what's wrong? Su Buling noticed that the warm backrest was gone and turned his head to ask doubtfully. Ning Yu he looked pale and a little panicked. He put away his umbrella, jumped directly from the running horse, and trotted after the horse. We're about to enter the city, nothing. Su Buling was a little confused, but he didn't think about it. He continued to pretend that his poisonous hair could not be suppressed, and rode back to Chang'an City. The prince is very fierce. Author, Guan Guan Gongzi. Chapter 274. The news that Su Buling was slightly injured in an ambush while wandering out of the city, and that the dragon-locking poison was sent back to the palace to rest, and that he took a lot of ice cubes from the Xiao family, quickly reached the ears of most people. The court was naturally furious, and the wolf guard ran to investigate and found the thief's body, but nothing else. Because Su Buletinling only suffered some skin trauma, and the initial target was Ning Yuhi, it did not cause much trouble. By the afternoon, the wind dissipated, leaving only a few teams of wolf guards to pursue aimlessly. At dusk, in the imperial study room behind Taiji Palace, several officials in the court stood in front of the imperial desk, discussing trivial affairs in various parts of Daewoo. King Su has been training his troops recently. According to the reports from the garrison at Jianyang Pass, there seem to be more people than in previous years. Do you want to send a special envoy to Kinzhou to have a look? There is no war. King Su trains his troops every year in the territory under his jurisdiction. With so many cavalry, how else can they train except running east and west? Is it possible to send a special envoy over to teach King Su how to train his troops? That's right, the thief who suddenly shot Prince Su with an arrow in the afternoon. According to Prince Su's dictation, it was Ning Yuhi who was shot at that time. Could it be that he was from the Tang family? The Tang family doesn't have the guts. The Holy Father pardoned Ning Yuhi back then, and now he is Prince Su's mentor. We've finished talking about the serious stuff, and we're basically talking about these ambiguous things. Songji was sitting behind the imperial desk. After reading a few notebooks at hand, he raised his head and said softly, "As long as you are safe and sound, this is not the first time for King Su to train troops. There is no need to be suspicious every year. Let's just leave. Promise." Several courtiers bowed slightly and walked out of the imperial study, but Taiwei Lu Pingyang did not move and stood there with a slight bow. Songji took the teacup from Eunuchjia's hand and said in a calm voice, "Pingyang, can you tell me something?" Lu Pingyang raised his hand and saluted, thought about it for a while, and said softly, "Years ago, the Holy Spirit appointed the 10 martial leaders, with the intention of educating the warriors and rebuilding their martial ethics. However, the warriors in the market were competing with each other, and now they have come up with a wish for Lu. It is true that the martial arts is good, but as a remnant of sinners, it is really difficult. Be a role model for warriors all over the world." Songji shook his head and sighed softly. Martial men in the world all pay attention to a martial arts no too. If Lu Beiming is defeated by Zulu, he is recognized as the martial leader in the world. It doesn't matter whether I can grant him the title or not. Lu Pingyang smiled. This is indeed the truth, but Zulu has always been the only military leader. It is not an option in the long run. It is better for the Holy One to first set down a few recognized ones so that the world's martial arts can imitate them. Songji frowned and thought for a moment. Do you have anyone to recommend? Lu Pingyang nodded lightly and thought carefully. Qin Renmin Sidu Yuejin, Wudaim Chendeazai, Long Hushan Zhongbuhan, and Yuzhu Tangjia Tangqiao, these 4 people have always been loyal to the imperial court. If their disciples are not here, serving in the military means serving in the imperial court. He is also a recognized master in martial arts, so I think it is appropriate. Songji held the teacup and rubbed it slightly, turning his head to look at Eunuchjia who was standing behind him. How are these people? Eunuchjia half squinted his eyes, leaned over and smiled. Sidu Yuejin, Chendeazai and Zhongbuhan, these 3 are enough to be in the top 10. Tang Jiao can also be regarded as a generation of heroes, but he will definitely not be able to compare with Zulu and Lu Beiming with a sword. Right. Their knowledge of swordsmanship and sword moves is not as good as those of the Cao and Lu families. In a real life and death fight, even Prince Su, who is not poisoned, may not be able to defeat him. Lu Pingyang sighed and took a step forward. Eunuchjia's words are wrong. Only when a warrior joins the army to serve the country can he show what he has learned. Kung Fu is good when you can go into battle to kill the enemy. The Lu family stays behind closed doors, and the Cao family is sealed. The sword is in the box, and there is no one in the family who can take the imperial examination, let alone join the army to serve the country. If such a person is allowed to become a military commander, wouldn't it violate the original intention of the emperor to appoint a military commander? If Tang Jiao fights alone, he cannot beat Zulu and other fierce bandits who frequently take people's heads. However, half of his children are serving in the military. They have made many achievements in recent years and are despised by the knights in the market. No matter what, if even the imperial court is unfair to him, whoever is willing to join the army to serve the country and serve the imperial court in the future will all learn from the 6 heroes of Zhu and use force to break the ban. These words are very accurate. Jianghu is a lawless place. Only the rules of Jianghu are followed. If you surrender to the court, you will be a hawk. Songji also wanted to correct the unhealthy tendencies and let the warriors accept legal control and march into the army to serve the court. As a result, the Jianghu directly opposed them, which led to the Iron Eagle hunting deer. From the perspective of the imperial court, it is natural that they prefer obedient people like the Tang family. Songji thought for a while, then seal it. The 10 military chiefs will not be ranked in order. Let them fight for the first and second. If Tang Jiao is not sure, you can't blame me for not being considerate of the Tang family. Lu Pingyang bowed and agreed, thought for a while, and then said. Tang Jiao happened to be in the capital recently. Warriors are all very particular about judging their superiority in the ring. I originally wanted to compete with Sidu Yueming. As the Dragon Boat Festival is approaching, there are many warriors gathered in Chang'an, so why not choose a day to place the ring outside the city? When the time comes, the Holy Master will come to observe the competition in person, and will be awarded a gold plaque on the spot afterwards. Such an honor can be regarded as setting an example for the martial arts in the world. Juliawei. Songji smiled softly, what if Tang Jiao is beaten to the ground by Sidu Yueming? Lu Pingyang was stunned. If Tang Jiao couldn't even beat Sidu Yueming, he was still a shitty martial arts leader. But naturally he couldn't say this. No one in the ring dared to make a conclusion. He thought for a while. Then I will grant you the title of Sidu Yueming. The Sidu family has always been loyal and loyal. 2 martial leaders in one sect is a good deal. Songji nodded slightly, raised his hand and said. Go down and make arrangements. Promise. Lu Pingyang bowed slightly and respectfully stepped out. Inside the Suk Palace, everything was as peaceful as ever. After returning from outside the city, Su Buling released the news truthfully, first reported to Madame Lu that he was safe, and then pretended to be sick to avoid seeing guests. In his current state, if he had not unlocked the dragon poison, he should be in the stage of the cold poison is causing trouble and making life worse than death, just like a starving trapped beast. As long as he smells the smell of blood, he will bite it regardless of anything. Since the people behind the scenes tried to test him today, there must be some key news next, which is to lure him with the smell of blood. He only needs to pretend to be worse than death and wait quietly at home. Since Ningyu he dismounted outside the city, he suddenly became more distant, just following him without talking, walking when he walked and stopping when he stopped. After returning, he hurried into his room and never came out again. Su Buling didn't understand what he meant, so he naturally didn't ask more questions. He asked the happy fruit man Z to accompany him, and then he came to the bedroom alone to tidy up his slightly messy clothes. After rolling on the ground for a few times and getting some blood stains from the skin wound, the robe that Aunt Lu had sewn by hand was definitely useless, and Su Buling felt a little distressed. After taking off the torn robe on his shoulders, Su Buling sat on a stool, untied the white bandage on his shoulders, and prepared to change to a clean gauze. The white cloth was stained with blood and powder, and Su Buling was ready to throw it away, but when he unfolded it, he was stunned. The snow-white cloth was embroidered with lotus flowers, and it was obviously a belly band on a woman, and the size was relatively large. Su Buling blinked his eyes and even forgot about the wound on his shoulder. He took a closer look and finally understood where Ningyu he got the clean cloth from. In an emergency, he had to make do with the expedient, and in fact, he couldn't have any romantic thoughts. Su Buling thought about it, fetched a basin of water, and closed the door. This was the first time in his past and present lives that he washed underwear for a woman, and for his master, well, it was also a respect for the teacher. But this belly band obviously can't be returned. If he returns it, Ningyu he will probably be embarrassed to take it. Su Buling hesitated for a moment, and decided to wash it first. It would be a pity to throw it away. What if Ningyu he asked him for it one day and he didn't take it out, and he would be misunderstood as not. Thank you for the 15,000 reward from flowers falling all over the city. Thank you for the 10,000 reward from the warm stove is not warm. Thank you for the 10,000 reward from my mom said I look like Sanlu. Thank you for the 10,000 reward from cute Kaka. There are only 5 updates today. Please give me some monthly tickets and recommendation tickets by the end of the month. Thank you. The prince is very fierce. Author, Guan Gong Zi. Chapter 275. The courtyard was surrounded by the chirping of cicadas. It was the hottest time at noon, and even the birds hid under the eaves, lazily staring at the flowers and plants outside the window. In the side room of the prince's concubine, Ningyu he remained silent, took off his loose robe, stood behind the screen in only thin trousers, and picked up a change of clothes. Ningyu he went out with Su Buling in the morning and was assassinated inexplicably. Naturally, Ningyu he could not pretend that it had not happened, and also doubted whether it was the Tang family. But at this moment, the thoughts in my mind were completely occupied by another thing, and I couldn't think about it at all. The trap dragon turns into rain, don't watch it, it's hard to look back after watching it. The trap dragon encounters the rain that nourishes all things. Don't look at it. Su Buletinling was trapped by the dragon Lok Gu and met the queen mother who could detoxify her. She secretly ran to see. Ningyu he is a disciple of the Taoist section although he became a monk halfway and did not practice the art of divination in Changqing Temple, he still learned some when he was bored. Originally I was just doing calculations for fun, but now these things are connected together, and the more I think about it, the more coincidental I feel, and it seems that it really corresponds to the hexagram. Don't look at it, you can't look back after it, what does it mean? Ningyu he's eyes were a little panicked. He had been sitting in Changqing Guanku for many years, and he thought he had cut off the worldly love long ago. But just now she was sitting on the horse, staring at Su Buling's side face in trance. The things she was thinking should not be thought by a Taoist priest at all. She had violated the precepts without knowing it, and she even regretted accepting Su Buling. Be an apprentice. What on earth was going on in my mind? Ningyu he didn't dare to think about it in detail. He just forced himself to stay calm and tried to calm down. It was a done deal. Your child is already my disciple and regards me as the closest master. It's okay to entrust your life to him, but you must not break your ethics. Tsuneza, how can I think about this? His thoughts were getting more and more confusing, Ningyu he's eyes were wandering, and his almost flawless white face showed a bit of hesitation that only a city woman could have, and the indifferent and worldly fairy spirit was invisibly weakened. Sister Daning, why aren't you wearing a belly band? Is it too hot? In the slightly stuffy room, Zhu Manzi was dressed beautifully. She stuck her head out from the side of the screen and took a curious look. When Ningyu he came back to his senses, he remembered that his shoulder had just been injured and there was no bandage, so he bandaged it with close-fitting clothing. It's urgent to obey the authority. There is no other meaning. When you come back, you can give Su Buling a replacement for the wound medicine and take it back. But just now I was so upset that I forgot about everything. When I came back, I went into the house. Wouldn't your daughter have already discovered? Thinking of this, Ningyu he pursed his lips, but there was nothing strange about him. He felt that Linger was a gentleman and understood the truth. He knew that it was an emergency and only used personal clothes to bandage him. Even if he found out, he would not think anything of it. However, it is always a bit strange to put a close-fitting belly band in the disciple's hands. Ning Yu thought for a while. It was obviously difficult for him to speak up in the past, and he didn't know whether Ling Er would throw it away or send it over. Her clothes should not be thrown away. It would be a bit embarrassing to send them over. After hesitating for a moment, Ning Yu turned his attention to Xiao Manzi, who was pursed in envy next to him. He wanted to ask Zhu Manzi to ask for it, but when the words came to his lips, he changed his words to, "I just encountered an ambush, and your child suffered injury, both his and mine clothes are dirty and have been thrown away." Oh! Zhu Manzi was dubious. The Taoist robe was still in his belly band and thrown away. Could it be possible that he was ambushed while shirtless? What kind of circumstances would it be like to be shirtless with Mr. Su? Ning Yu knew that the more he explained, the more trouble he would get. He put on his clothes in 2 or 3 times and thought for a while. "Manzi, after the Dragon Boat Festival, I will go back to Changqingguan. You come with me, okay?" Zhu Manzi shook his small fan and thought for a moment, with a bit of reluctance in his eyes. "I have to go find my father, but Mr. Su said that he will come with me then. How about we travel together in the world?" Ning Yu actually had nothing to do when he returned to Changqingguan, and it was okay to stay in Chang'an for a year and a half. But just now he felt very confused, and now he didn't dare to see Su Buling. "Let me think about it." "Sister Daning, are you worried?" "No." Ning Yu smiled gently, walked to the room and sat down, looking tired and rubbing his forehead. "I was a little tired just now and want to sleep for a while. Why don't you go and accompany Mr. Su?" Zhu Manzi nodded, no longer bothering him, and walked out of the room waving a small ball fan. As midsummer approaches, the temperature in Chang'an City is very high. Zhu Manzi couldn't find Su Buling in the bedroom or study, so he asked the guard, went to the cellar of the east house, walked along the stone stairs to the bottom, and felt a chilly air. His Zhu Manzi was wearing thin clothes and could not help but shiver due to the huge temperature difference. Following the lights of the tunnel, he quickly walked to the deep storage room. When he looked up, he saw Su Buling chipping away at the ice cubes with an iron poke, and there were also other things beside him. There are some watermelons. Watermelon was brought from the western regions. It is commonly grown because of its good growth, and it is not a rare item. However, it is difficult for a prince's family to even take a look at iced watermelon, mainly because it is too troublesome to store ice cubes. Zhu Manzi trotted up to him and looked at the same thing. "Mr. Su, what are you doing?" Su Buring put on a clean robe, stood in front of the big ice cube and carefully cut the ice, put the ice cubes and cut watermelon pieces into the watermelon, and handed it to Zhu Manzi. "Here you go." Zhu Manzi looked at the half watermelon that was bigger than her face and took it shyly. Su Buling sat on the small couch in the basement specially used for his rest, cut a bamboo stick as a fork, and handed it to Zhu Manzi. Zhu Manzi chuckled, sat next to Su Buling, chewed the watermelon slowly, and kicked her skirt with her legs swinging. "Sister Daning seems to be in a hurry to leave. Once she leaves, I will be alone. Master Su said he would accompany me to find my father." When will it be?" Su Buling pondered for a while. "It should be soon, but I have to go back to Suzhou first." Zhu Manzi said oh and thought for a while. "Actually, I'm not in a hurry. My father is so powerful that nothing will happen if I can't find him. It's quite interesting to be with Master Su, but, well, it feels weird. I can't help as a retainer. I can't even guard the house. I can only help with cleaning. As a result, the palace is too big. I swept for several days before cleaning a few courtyards." Su Buletinling raised his eyebrows. "We are brothers of the opposite sex. Come and live in your brother's house. There is also the most beautiful woman in the world to sleep with you." Just enjoy the happiness and don't do anything. Zhu Manzi ate the watermelon in small bites, her big eyes turned a few times, and suddenly whispered, "I'm sorry, you must have an identity to live a peaceful life, just like patrolling the streets in Tianjiying." Su Buling was a little helpless, looking at her small arms and legs. "What identity can you have? A guest? A housekeeper? A master?" Zhu Manzi looked around. The cellar was dark and there was no one around, so she said shyly, or, oh, forget it, eat watermelon." She raised her hand and inserted a piece of watermelon with a bamboo stick and handed it to Su Buling's mouth. Su Buling raised his eyebrows and stared at her big eyes seriously without moving. The cellar was quiet, and now there was no sound. Zhu Manzi looked at each other for a moment, then felt a little uneasy, dodging her eyes, and took the watermelon back in a huff and stuffed it into her mouth. Su Buling narrowed his eyes slightly, a little unhappy. "This is for me." "Huh?" Zhu Manzi held the watermelon in his mouth and looked at Su Buling blankly. Su Buling raised his chin slightly, indicating that she should bring it over herself. It's a pity that Zhu Manzi didn't understand these things. After hesitating for a moment, he put the watermelon into his mouth and swallowed it in 2 mouthfuls, and was a little proud. "I gave it to you, but you didn't want it? Now it's gone." Su Buling nodded, raised his hand to pick up a piece of ice, and accurately flicked it into the collar of Zhu Manzi, who was laughing softly. Zhu Manzi was caught off guard, and the cold stimulation rolled down from her collar. She was so shocked that she almost threw the watermelon away. She stood up and jumped, trying to shake out the ice particles, complaining with a little annoyance on her face. "Mr. Su, why are you like this? It's so cold." A certain part was tight, shaking and surging, but the ice cube was stuck there and couldn't go down. Zhu Manzi hurriedly put the watermelon down, raised her hand to reach into her lapel to take it out, but when she looked up, she found Su Buling staring at her with a smile. Zhu Manzi's hand froze on her lapel, her face flushed as she stared at Su Buling, but she didn't dare to do anything. She turned around and ran out. After walking a few steps, she remembered something, turned around and picked up the watermelon, and then ran out in a hurry. "This girl." Su Buling shook his head and chuckled, but he didn't know how to describe it. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. The prince is very fierce. Author, Guan Gong Zi. Chapter 276. After a sudden arrow shot outside the city, Chang'an City seemed to be quiet again. The princes and generals were busy with their own affairs, while the people were concerned about the military competition that would be held outside the city in a few days. Everything was in order. Su Buletinling stayed at home to rest and make jokes with Xiao Manzi Dababe, but his thoughts were outside. According to his guess, after the person behind the scenes tested his poisoning situation, he would definitely throw out a hook, and this hook would definitely make the final decision. In fact, as he expected, after waiting at home for only 2 days, an unexpected but reasonable news came back. On the first day of May, Daifang, back street. Lao Xiao, as always, wielding a cane and swinging a folding fan, pretended to be a storyteller in the back street. The back streets of Daifang are mostly filled with Gulan wine shops, and their facilities are not as good as those of Zhuangyuan Street, the main street. However, they are located in Daifang, where land is very valuable, and are of a higher quality than other places. Princes and nobles will not come here. Most of the people who can hang out here have some spare money, but they can't cross the threshold of Longjian Pavilion and Yingchun Tower. If they go around the back streets, they can be considered to have seen the world. These people include people from all walks of life, merchants, and tourists. It can be said that they are a gathering of 3 religions and 9 streams. At dusk, various wine shops and gambling houses have opened their doors one after another, and there are gradually more and more people on the street. Lao Xiao stood at the crowded tea stall and vividly talked about some of Su Buling's past deeds in the world, how powerful he was in the past, how he had 3 smiles and mercy with Miss So-and-so recently, etc. They are all fabricated scandals and gossip, and the court cannot control the storyteller's mouth, but the common people and charlatans also like to hear these things. When you feel excited, you will naturally share your experiences with your friends, such as, I heard that Crown Prince Su is close to so and so on. 99% of these messy messages are false, but if you collect more of them, there will always be 1 or 2 that are useful. The most difficult thing in the world to block is the mouth of Yu. No matter how rigorous and cautious any plan is, there will always be some flaws that are difficult to notice, such as a few casual conversations, passing somewhere occasionally, etc. Lao Xiao tells anecdotes every day, focusing on Su Buling, just to listen to what these strangers from all over the world are talking about. And this afternoon, as he finished saying the trees are as beautiful as the forest, the wind will destroy them. The Prince of Su, Zhaohong, was ambushed in the Weha River in the winter of the 9th year of Zhaohong. The sound of 2 men talking at the tea stall caught Lao Xiao's attention. I live in Zazurij, Chenkang. This happened a year before last. Many people died, the mountain was sealed, and many officers and soldiers searched the village. The speaker was a man dressed as a hunter. There was a bamboo basket at his feet. The animal skins, tiger bones, and other valuable items in the frame had been sold out during the day. He was probably planning to come here to relax at night. The girl from Gulan hadn't started to receive customers yet. She was sitting in the corner of the tea stall, ordering the yuki and longjing on the pot, and talking to a middle-aged man who was traveling with her. A middle-aged man who dressed up as an employee. Lao Xiao knew him. He was the shopkeeper of a fur shop in Fang City. He often came here to show off his style. I guess he met a man of the same kind today and led Orion here specifically to broaden his horizons. After Lao Xiao finished speaking, he sat down at the tea table with a cane, picked up the teapot and poured himself a bowl, and then continued. Yes, I heard that thousands of people died, and Prince Su killed them all by himself. That's really impressive. This is a place where 3 religions and 9 streams gather. It is very common to join in discussions at the tea stall, not to mention the gentleman who just told the story. Orion and the foreign minister naturally welcomed him with a cup of tea, and the foreign minister nodded. I heard the old gentleman say it several times, and the blood flowed into the river, and the Wei River was dyed red. Orion put 1 foot on the bench, showing a bit of pride, waving his hands and saying, "It's not that bad. I live near there, about 10 miles away. Everyone in the village just heard that people died, the water didn't change color, and there weren't thousands of people, just a few hundred." Lao Xiao narrowed his eyes slightly and took a sip from the tea bowl. "Young man, please don't talk nonsense. I have been talking here for more than a year, and it says in the book, thousands of thieves, mountains of corpses. How can it be possible that there are only people no 100? When Orion saw that Lao Xiao didn't believe it, he was naturally a little anxious. He sat a little closer and said mysteriously, "I know better than you, old man, that there was a bear problem in Zazurij at that time. I have been hunting across the mountains since I was a child, and I have gained a reputation in the county. At that time, the county asked me to catch the blind bear. The blind bear has poor eyesight but good ears. A man went to Zazurij, arranged the iron clamps, and lay in the cracks of the rocks for 3 days and 3 nights without moving." Lao Xiao drank tea slowly, showing a bit of admiration. Orion chuckled, picked up the tea bowl and took a sip. "I remember squatting on the 3rd day, which was the night when the young prince met the thief. It was windy and snowy, and I was too cold to bear it, so I was ready to go back. Unexpectedly, the animal frame was stepped on, but there was no bear roar, but someone snorted. I was surprised at that time. I stepped on the bear trap and didn't scream. Could it be that I was mute? This bear doesn't look bulky, but it's actually very cunning. At that time, I carefully peeked through the cracks in the rocks and took a look. I was frightened. Hundreds of people passed through the woods, silently, holding onto their hands. They all carry knives. Lao Xiao pretended to be very interested, leaned a little closer, and listened carefully. The hunter looked around and saw 3 people with their heads almost close together. He whispered, "I thought they were soldiers at the time, but the clothes they wore didn't look like soldiers. I was afraid they were bandits, so I didn't dare to show my head. We were only a few feet away at the time." One of them stepped on a bear trap and his leg was almost broken. He sat on the ground without making a sound. 2 leaders came up to him, broke the trap and treated the man's injury. They also said something, like "Don't make any mistakes, do it cleanly." Or something like that. I didn't know what was going on at the time. I didn't know what happened on the river bank until the next day. Old Xiao nodded and looked at the hunter for a few times. "Do you remember what those fierce bandits said at the time?" The hunter laughed and waved his hand. "How can I remember this? I'm afraid of getting into trouble, so I don't even dare to report it to the officials." Then he looked up at the brothel and stood up to signal the official to lead the way. Lao Xiao looked back and chuckled, "What's this place? I know a good place. The girl there is as pretty as a fairy, and the price is not expensive. Do you two want to go with me to broaden your horizons?" Yo! Yuan Weilang was stunned. He didn't expect that the storyteller with dirty words was still sharp. He nodded naturally, stood up, took the hunter and followed Lao Xiao into the alley. The prince is very fierce. Author, Guan Gong Zi. Chapter 277. Night has just fallen, lanterns have been hung on the gate of the palace, and guards are patrolling around. The back house was quite quiet. Ning Yuhi was still sitting in the room meditating, while Zhu Manzi was shaking a small ball fan and lying on the window of the room, looking at the little stars in the sky. In the bedroom not too far away, Su Buling was lying on the soft couch with a somewhat uncomfortable expression, but he had to lie down obediently and endure Aunt Lu's clock. The Queen Mother posted again today, saying she was worried about your injury and asked you to come into the palace to have a look. We just met last time and it was only 10 days ago. I am taking care of you. What is there to worry about? On the soft couch, Mrs. Lu was riding on Su Buring's waist, massaging it carefully as if kneading dough. There were a few drops of sweat hanging on her forehead. The back of her light green thin skirt was also slightly wet with sweat, and her belly band could be faintly seen. Black lanyard. The figure is round and round, with everything it should have, and naturally has some weight. This weight is nothing to Su Buling, but they are very hot when they are pressed together. Plus the medicinal wine, he sweats and Mrs. Lu also sweats. There is not much difference between the thin fabric and nothing. Su Buletinling forced his concentration and tried not to feel the little bits and pieces on his lower back, but Mrs. Lu was moving around, and it was really difficult not to feel it. "Aunt Lu, don't forget it, it's a bit hot." "I'm not even hot, why are you hot?" Mrs. Lu pursed her lips and wiped the sweat from her forehead with the back of her hand. She politely picked up the medicinal wine, poured some on her hands, and started massaging again. Taoist Master Ning said it would take an hour, but it's not yet the time. As he spoke, his eyes traced the bandage on Su Buling's shoulder, and he said quietly, "Ling your injury is not healed, or you will not enter the palace. Should I return the post?" Su Buling knew that the Queen Mother must have heard the news that he was unbearably poisonous, so she took the risk of being discovered by Miss Xiao and asked him to enter the palace to detoxify. This feeling is really heartwarming. They hadn't seen each other for many days. Su Buling also missed the Queen Mother's baby, and some things had to be arranged. He really had to go to the palace. He said softly. The Queen Mother is also concerned about me. It would not be good to refuse directly. Let's go to the palace on a cloudy and cool day to have a look. Mrs. Lu narrowed her eyes slightly and twisted slightly, but she couldn't say anything. She put the bottle away and wanted to get up. Su Buling felt a little funny in his heart and turned his head. Aunt Lu, isn't it time yet? At any point, you can go to the palace to visit the Queen Mother, and if you have the ability, ask the Queen Mother to give you a massage. I'm not good at studying anyway, and you don't like it, so I feel disgusted. As he spoke, he felt aggrieved. He stood up on the soft couch, but he was so angry that he wanted to raise his hand to say no. However, he failed to stand firm on the soft couch and fell to the ground with a dash sound. Su Buling had no choice but to turn around and raise his hand to fish it out before pulling Mrs. Lu back. Okay, it's just a visit to the Queen Mother. She has been angry with you a few times. Last time you gave the painting to Aunt Lu, you were also angry with her for several days. Mrs. Lu was supported by Su Buling's arms around her waist, and she straightened her hair around her ears. She noticed that her posture was strange, so she pushed Su Buling's hand away. I can't control you anyway, you can see for yourself, let's just do it. Then he picked up the food box and walked out of the room a little unhappy. Su Buling spread his hands slightly. He had long been used to it and was not worried about Mrs. Lu getting sulky when she went back. After getting up and getting dressed, Su Buling looked at the imperial city in the distance. He originally wanted to take advantage of the night to enter the palace to have a look, but he was afraid that Miss Xiao and the Queen Mother's baby would play metamorphosis, so after thinking about it, it was better to go in according to the agreed time. Palace to avoid making mistakes. Shortly after Mrs. Lu left, Lao Qi, one of the guards, ran in and told Lao Xiao the news he heard at the tea stall. Su Buling knew that the fishhook was coming, and he did not hesitate immediately. After putting on a little disguise, he went out of the room to take a look. Just as he walked out of the door, Ning Yu poked his head out of the window of the wing, looking at his precious apprentice on the roof with very strange eyes. Ling are you going to do something again? Su Buling had a clear conscience this time. Go out and do something else, master, don't worry. Ning Yu smiled, nodded slightly, and disappeared from the window. Su Buling didn't pay attention. He disappeared into the night alone, like a ghost among thousands of streets and hundreds of squares, sliding silently through half of Chang'an City and arriving at a brothel near Siyi Pavilion. Guang Square, where the Siyi Pavilion is located, is inhabited by foreigners from all over the world. Most of them are foreigners, coming from the western regions and even further places. The factions and religions in the square are so mixed that even the court cannot sort them out. It is the easiest place to fish in troubled waters in Chang'an City. The Gulan brothel in Guangdifang also has its own characteristics, such as black pearls, ocean horses, and so on. The foreigners from Fanbang have always been regarded as barbarians. In these places, guests usually come to try something new. In terms of consumption, it is far inferior to Daifang, and it is considered to be of high quality and low price. Su Buling walked silently through the brothel and found the room Lao Xiao mentioned. The room was filled with the smell of alcohol, and Orion was huddled in the corner with a blanket, a drunken look on his face and embarrassment in his eyes. Old Xiao sat in front of him with his cane, and raised his hand to point to Su Buling, who had just come in. This is the master of the Criminal Investigation Department. If you honestly explain what happened that day, you will be released. Otherwise, either you will be fined 5,000 taels of silver, or you can go to squat in the prison and let your mother-in-law come to the capital to fetch someone. You have tasted both white and black today, let your mother-in-law know. Orion's eyes were full of helplessness. He spread his hands and said, "Old sir, I have no enmity with you, please don't try to harm me." Lao Xiao took out a wooden sign from his arms, "I am a wolf guard, and the law will not tolerate mercy. It is up to you." Su Buling frowned a little inexplicably, but it was not easy to interrupt him. He put his hands behind his back, acting like a wolf guard. Orion looked at the wolf guard token in Lao Xiao's hand and hesitated for a moment. I really bumped into it by accident. I definitely had no involvement in this matter. You two adults must not wrongly accuse good people. Lao Xiao nodded. If you tell me honestly and clearly, everything will be fine. Your mother-in-law and baby are still waiting for you to come back in the house. Orion pulled the blanket, his eyes were a little tangled, he hesitated for a long time, and then said softly. At that time, I was listening in the cracks in the rocks. The two leaders were treating people's injuries. One of them said, "Be careful. There are traps set by the hunters here. Don't let others notice it. If the news leaks out, it will not be easy to talk to the Holy Lord." Account. Su Buling frowned, squatted down in front of Orion, and stared into his eyes carefully. Continue. I was thinking, if the Holy Emperor is not the Emperor, the matter must be serious. I just lay there and didn't dare to move. At that time, another person said, "You must kill them on the spot. If you attack here, you can fall on the Kinzhou bandits." After waiting, it's hard for Chen Kang to make a move. Su Buling nodded. These two sentences were enough to prove that the emperor had done something to him that day, and he had killed him with a deadly force. What weapons did those people use? The one who was caught used a knife. The two leaders were armed with big guns, black ones. Su Buling stood up, frowned, and thought about it for a moment. Unfortunately, his memory was confused and he couldn't remember anything except the fight and the bottle at his feet. Lao Xiao raised his crutch and tapped Orion's neck, thinking for a moment. The two leading assassins at that time indeed used long spears, and one whose legs and feet were not very flexible was killed by the young prince immediately. This person's words are not false. I have tested them carefully just now. It does not look like the death of a spy. Sir, maybe I saw it by accident. Su Buling frowned and pondered for a moment. What he saw is probably true. Now I should be suffering from the poisonous dragon Lok Gu. I am suffering from the pain of thousands of ants eating my heart every moment, and it happens to be, I found out that the murderer behind the scenes is the Holy One, and he is determined to kill me. What should I do? Lao Xiao took a breath. I can't find the antidote to Dragon Lok Gu. I have no way out in this desperate situation. I can only wait for death. The murderer is nearby. What else can I do? I can't enter the imperial city, and my father is still here. If I want to take revenge, I have no choice but to endure it. His Majesty will leave the palace in a few days to watch the martial arts competition between Tang Jiao and Sidu Yueming. The young prince is a contemporary Qinghui and can be present. If you stimulate me again that day, I will go crazy and be unable to control myself. I will run to kill the emperor. After saying this, Su Buling blinked, a little confused. I am alone in Chang'an, and I have no choice but to die. What else could make me crazy and desperate? Lao Xiao thought about it. Mrs. Lu. Su Buletinling's eyes turned cold, and there was a crunching sound under his feet, and several lines cracked. Lao Xiao sighed and walked towards the door with his cane. That's Mrs. Lu. I'm going to keep an eye on it to make sure nothing goes wrong. Su Buling took a breath and looked in the direction of the imperial city. The figure disappeared silently into the room. The prince is very fierce. Author, Guan Guan Gong Zi. Chapter 278. The night breeze is quiet, bringing a rare coolness to the hot summer. There is a small lantern hanging in the pavilion in the courtyard of the back house. Zhu Manzi is lying on the bamboo mat with his head resting on a futon. His eyelashes tremble slightly in his sleep, and there is a bit of a smile on his cheeks. Ning Yu sat on the futon next to him, holding a branch in his hand, closing his eyes and listening to the surroundings. Buzz buzz. Snap. The branches swept through the air, and the annoying mosquitoes were immediately torn apart. Ning Yuhi slowly put away the branches and continued to wait for the next mosquito. Life in a deep house and compound is already so boring, but this boringness is already a fairy-like life for the people who work day and night in the city and countryside, or for the people in the world who lick blood from their swords all the time. Ning Yuhi waited for a moment, and when there were no mosquitoes around, he opened his eyes and turned his head to look at the dark main room. Su Buling has been out for a while, and he must be with the Queen Mother now. Even though Ning Yuhi had become a Taoist nun, her face still turned red when she thought of the appearance of her apprentice and the superior Queen Mother. But your child is a true gentleman, and he is definitely not coveting the beauty of the Queen Mother. If he is not forced to do so, he will never do such a deviant thing. Ning Yuhi took a gentle breath and put away those evil thoughts. After thinking about it for a while, he remembered the last time he encountered an ambush. That self-sacrifice leap still echoes in my mind. Even if Ning Yuhi didn't want to admit it, she had to say that she was really touched by the two life-saving graces. If she hadn't become a monk or taken him as a disciple, I'm afraid she would have fallen in love with that man with all her heart from then on. He was so skilled in martial arts and so elegant. Peerless, gentle, and chivalrous, why shouldn't she like him? Now I can only say that it is a pity. I was not born before you were born, and I am already old when you were born. I can't blame anyone for not being born at the right time. It's good to be master and apprentice now, at least they are still the closest people to each other. But Ning Yuhi frowned slightly and looked at Su Buling's house, feeling a little confused. Last time, in a desperate situation, I used my belly band to bandage Su Buling, but I was interrupted afterwards and forgot to take it back. I would be embarrassed to ask for it again after I realized what I was doing. She had observed carefully in the past few days and did not find that Su Buling had lost his belly band, nor did she see Su Buling return his belly band. Maybe Linger is also embarrassed. Ning Yuhi could only think like this. He couldn't keep his belly band in his apprentice's hands forever, but how should he get it back? Is your child waiting for me to take it back secretly? Thinking of this, Ning Yuhi felt that it was very possible. It was difficult for both parties to speak, so she took it back secretly. Su Buling understood it after finding out, and they understood each other tacitly. As for running into other people's rooms without saying hello, that's okay. Manzi cleans with a broom every day, and Linger's house has also been cleaned. Linger didn't say anything to Manzi, she was quite happy. Ning Yuhi didn't steal anything, so he had a clear conscience. After thinking for a while, he took a chicken feather blanket from the corner of the courtyard and walked into Su Buling's bedroom. Su Buling's bedroom was very simply furnished. Apart from a few necessary pieces of furniture, there were only clothes in the cabinet, all of which were sewn by Aunt Lu herself. Ning Yuhi swept around with a chicken feather blanket and searched around twice. There were a lot of various rouges and gouache in the cabinet, and there was no trace of belly bands. Ning Yuhi was not surprised to see a lot of rouge and gouache. She often saw Su Buling giving Mrs. Lu and a bunch of rouge and gouache. She even gave it to her. It was just a small gift, nothing to care about. Not finding the bedroom, Ning Yuhi went to the study room next door. The furnishings in the study room were simpler, with just 2 weapon racks and a desk, clearly visible at a glance. Ning Yuhi looked around and saw a rag doll leaning on the pen holder on the desk, but nothing else. Ning Yuhi was a little confused. Logically speaking, it should be placed in a place where she could easily find it. How could it be hidden so that she couldn't find it? She didn't see her throwing it away. Could it be that she had thrown it away secretly or carried it with her? Thinking of this, Ning Yuhi's gentle cheeks turned red, and she spat secretly, thinking, how is it possible? Why is your belly band carrying her with you? It's not suitable to use it as a handkerchief. After cleaning aimlessly a few times, Ning Yuhi thought for a moment and suddenly remembered that Zhu Manzi was still at home. Could it be that he was afraid that Manzi would see and misunderstand? Manzi's martial arts skills are very poor, and he doesn't want her to see it, so. Ning Yuhi raised his eyes and looked at the beam. The beam was about 2 feet high. It was definitely out of reach due to the branches, and there was nowhere to lean on for a ladder. Rustle. There was a sound of clothes ripping in the wind. Ning Yuhi stepped on the wall to catch up. His body was as light as the wind and he rose up from the ground. He clasped the beam with one hand and looked up. Sure enough, there is a wooden box placed on the beam. Judging from the shape, it is used to store jade pendants, hostas, and other objects. It is not very big and there is no dust on it. It must have been moved recently. Ning Yuhi picked up the box and dropped it back to the ground. He walked to the desk and opened it, only to see that there were quite a few things in the box: a hosta, the safe and sound card she gave, a note, a piece of rice paper, and a few colorful pieces of fabric. Ning Yuhi was a little confused. He always felt that the several pieces of fabric stacked on top of each other looked familiar, like a woman's belly band. There was a strange look in Ning Yuhi's eyes, her eyelashes trembling slightly. She hesitated a little, then picked up the small piece of paper. Mr. Su, in my haste to leave, I forgot to tell you one thing. If the antidote works, you owe Zhongli Chuchu your life. Remember to thank her in the future. It's a pity to throw away these wines, you are lucky. Finally, Zhu Manzi is my confidant. If you dare to bully her, we will fight to the death. Goodbye. Ning Qingyi's handwriting. Ning Yuhi blinked. From these few short sentences, Qingyi seemed very angry and seemed to break up with Ling Er. What happened between them? After a moment of silence, Ning Yuhi put down the note, picked up a piece of cloth, and opened it to see that it was a white handkerchief. Ning Yuhi breathed a sigh of relief, but immediately found that there were a few plum blossoms on the white handkerchief, which seemed to be blood stains. Ning Yuhi came back to his senses and hurriedly threw the handkerchief into the box. His breathing fluctuated and his face flushed. You don't have to think about what this is. It must be the Queen Mother's. After a moment of pause, Ning Yuhi pursed his lips, picked up another piece of cloth and looked at the 2 golden carps. Lotus hides carp. After seeing the handkerchief just now, Ning Yuhi was not surprised to see this belly band. After looking at it for a few times, she put it down and picked up another belly band, but it was embroidered with peony flowers. Ning Yuhi frowned slightly and thought about it carefully. It seemed that she had seen something similar on Mrs. Lu. Ning Yuhi was stunned and a little unbelievable. Ling Er and Mrs. Lu also. But after being shocked for a moment, Ning Yuhi frowned slightly again. In fact, from Mrs. Lu's words and deeds, she could see that Mrs. Lu liked Ling Er, and Ling Er was even more attentive to Mrs. Lu. The two were not much different in age, and there was no blood relationship. They just called each other auntie verbally. In fact, if she really remarried, it would be a good thing for everyone to be happy, and it shouldn't be strange. After taking a breath, Ning Yuhi picked up the last piece of cloth and prayed no, no, countless times in her heart, but the cruel reality still shattered her dream. Looking at the lotus pattern on the white belly band, Ning Yuhi could no longer suppress his eyes, revealing unspeakable disappointment and heartache. Su Buling's image as a gentleman of integrity was instantly shattered in his mind. Ning Yuhi breathed rapidly, tightly grasped his belly band, and frantically looked for excuses, even if they were far-fetched. It was not easy to return it to her, and there was no place to put it, so he put it together with the belongings of his beloved woman. Isn't the wuxi pie here too? It's just a place to store personal belongings. Yes, 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 it must be like this. Ning Yuhi pursed her lips, relaxed a little, put down the belly band, and moved her eyes to the last piece of rice paper. The house was silent for a long time, and finally the sound of paper unfolding was heard. Then it was completely silent, and even breathing seemed to disappear. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. The Prince is very fierce. Author, Guan Guan Gongzi. Chapter 279. Thanks to Ev Mushroom for the reward. I'm currently in debt, 96/380, but I'm actually paying it back pretty fast. It was the middle of the night, and the whole city was already silent. Su Buling returned to the backyard of the palace, still thinking about what happened just now. According to his calculations, the person behind the scenes has already let go of the bowstring, and the next time it will be a huge wave that will stir up the whole world. At this critical moment, the slightest misjudgment will change the whole situation, causing countless people to die and suffer catastrophe, including him, King Su, everyone around him, and even the whole world. But at this critical moment, a sword suddenly appeared at Su Buling's throat. There was no light in the backyard courtyard, and it was so quiet that it seemed as if no one lived there. As soon as Su Buling entered the house and closed the door, he found a person standing next to the door, holding a green blade long sword, pointing at his throat. He heard the breathing and knew that Ning Yuhi was in the room. He thought Ning Yuhi was waiting for him, so he was not prepared for Ning Yuhi. He was a little unprepared at this time. Master, you. Don't call me master. There was no light in the room, only the faint light of the hazy starlight. Ning Yuhi's tears fell like rain. Her beautiful face, which was originally flawless, was now filled with heartache and disappointment. Her eyelashes and mouth corners could not help but tremble. The hand holding the sword was also trembling. The eyes that were originally as warm as water were full of disbelief. Su Buling froze suddenly, raised his hand slightly, and Ning Yuhi moved the sword closer. Don't move. Su Buling blinked his eyes, showing a little smile, and stood calmly in front of the sword blade, a little confused. Master, what's wrong? Don't call me master, I'm not your master, I don't have a disciple like you. Ning Yuhi's voice was unclear, and he held the hilt tightly, almost hysterical. Su Buling was a little panicked, and looked at the tip of the sword on his neck. What happened? Ning Yuhi breathed quickly. You are a scum, I misjudged you, you are not a gentleman, you have no law in your eyes, you. At the end, he was speechless. Su Buling was a little confused. I didn't say I was a gentleman, I am the Prince of Suwang, the one who determines the law. What happened? What did you do to me? Ning Yuhi forced herself to suppress her tears, but couldn't suppress the disappointment and shame in her eyes. Su Buling thought for a moment and said softly, I saved master twice, I didn't seem to do anything else. Ning Yuhi saw that he was still trying to deny it, so he took out the belly band from his arms and threw it on Su Buling's face. How do you explain it? Su Buling took the belly band, looked at it, and raised his eyebrows slightly. You gave it to me, I put it away, what's the problem? Ning Yuhi took a few breaths, pursed his lips, and took out the rice paper from his arms again, unfolded the rice paper, and revealed the pattern of flying phoenix wings painted on it. This? Where did you know this? Su Buling was speechless. When he first met Ning Yuhi, he did have the purpose of saving people, and he did not blaspheme Ning Yuhi, and he did not even move around, but just glanced at her subconsciously. But if he said this, Ning Yuhi would obviously not believe it. Ning Yuhi saw that Su Buling did not speak, and moved the tip of the sword closer, his voice trembling. Where did you see it? Su Buling opened his mouth and raised his hand to take the sword away. Don't move. Ning Yuhi's eyes were filled with deep sorrow, and his voice was hoarse. I trusted you so much, and thought you were a good person, a true gentleman, and I accepted you as my apprentice. Why are you such a person? Su Buling frowned slightly. He didn't even kill the hunter just now, and he had never treated others badly. At most, he took advantage of girls a little bit, and most of them were initiated by the other party. He didn't say that he was a playboy, so how could he be said to be the same as a scumbag? What's wrong with me? You. Ningyu he saw that he still refused to admit it, and his emotions could no longer be supported. Tears fell like rain, and he threw away the sword directly, raised his hand to untie the laces of the light Taoist robe, revealing his snow-white neck, as if he wanted to take off the clothes. Su Buling saw that the situation was not good, and hurried forward to grab her hands. "Master, what are you doing?" Ningyu he struggled hard, tears streaming down her face. "Look, don't you like to look? You have drawn it, you have seen it, no wonder you call me master by you, I trust you so much, I treat you as my apprentice, why do you do such a thing? I was saving you at that time, you were poisoned, I took off my clothes to find the poison needle, could I watch you die? The toad's blood is still there, and I didn't do anything to you." Ningyu he's breathing was up and down, and she shook her head repeatedly, speechless. "Lunsai. You admitted that you saw it?" Su Buling was somewhat helpless. "I did see it, but I didn't tell you because I was afraid you couldn't stand it. If you think I ruined your innocence, I will marry you." Ningyu he was stunned. She didn't expect Su Buling to say this. She shook her head and pulled her hand back. "I am your master." Su Buling spread his hands. "You were not at that time." Ningyu he stared at Su Buling, her eyes were red from crying, and she raised her hand to slap him while breathing up and down, but unfortunately she was caught by Su Buling. Su Buling pulled her to him and looked down at her with a bit of annoyance. "Please be reasonable. Before I became a disciple, I saved you in the same way. After I became a disciple, I saved you in the same way. You can't let me look for poisonous needles with my eyes closed. I was injured and master bandaged me with a belly band. There's nothing wrong with it, it's the same truth." "Nothing wrong with it?" Ningyu he's eyes were confused for a moment, and then he stared at Su Buling with disappointment. "Why didn't you tell me then? You saved my life, I won't blame you, even, why didn't you tell me then?" Su Buling blinked, feeling a little guilty about this. He had just kissed Ning Qingyi at that time. "Did you also do something to Qingyi?" When Ningyu he saw Su Buling's eyes, he knew the whole story, and the last thought in his heart was completely cut off. She can return to secular life, but her master-disciple status is more important than heaven, and she cannot ignore Qingyi, who she regards as her own child. "You have already been with Qingyi, why are you still treating me? I didn't know you were Master Xiaoning at the time, besides, I knew you had to be saved. I couldn't watch you die just to protect men and women." Ningyu he gritted his silver teeth tightly and stared for a long time. Finally, he couldn't bear it anymore. Tears burst out of his eyes. He raised his hand and pushed Su Buling. "Okay, I don't blame you. You are not allowed to tell anyone about this, especially Qingyi. From now on, you are not allowed to come to see me." After saying that, he picked up the sword and ran out of the room. Su Buling was a little helpless and followed behind to persuade, "Master, we have been together for so long. Except for the time when I rescued you, which was a bit inappropriate, I have never been ashamed of you at other times. I told you I don't blame you. I owe you 2 lives. Do you want me to pay you back?" Ningyu he stopped and turned around with sad eyes. "Are you going to force me to death?" Su Buling paused and spread his hands slightly. "Okay, I won't say anything anymore. Master, please calm down for a few days. We can continue talking when we have figured it out." Ningyu he took a few breaths. The psychological gap was too big. He would definitely not be able to figure it out for a while. Even if he figured it out, it would be impossible for him and Su Buling to happen. He just wanted to leave this place quickly and turned around to leave. The quarrel between the two people woke up Zhu Manzi. At this time, he was wearing clothes and standing at the door sleepily looking at Sister Daning. Mr. Su, why are you quarreling? Ningyu he remembered something and walked into the house to get the package that had been prepared. When he went out, he hugged Zhu Manzi directly and jumped onto the roof. You promised King Yi not to bully Miss Zhu, you can't break your promise. Su Buling was a little confused when he saw that Pistachio was also taken away. I didn't bully her. Zhu Manzi fell asleep in a daze and was a little confused. Yes, Mr. Su is so kind, he didn't bully me. Ningyu he had just discovered so many women's private belongings and was very suspicious of Su Buling's character. He said coldly, I don't feel at ease staying by your side. After saying that, he disappeared on the roof, and Zhu Manzi's voice of yes Sister Daning, where are we going? Gradually faded away. Su Buling stood in the courtyard, spread his hands slightly, thought for a while and looked down at the belly band in his hand, sighed helplessly, and stuffed it into his arms. After a while, Lao Xiao walked into the back house with a cane, looked at the direction Ningyu he left, frowned, and said, Young master, don't you chase me? If a woman is angry, just say a few soft words, especially someone like Ningyu he. Chang'an City is about to be in chaos. It's best for them both to leave first and then find them back when they get out, send someone to follow them so they don't disappear without a trace. Old Xiao nodded, Mrs. Lu's side is tightly guarded and nothing should go wrong. Just in case, it's best for the young prince to stay in front of Mrs. Lu. Su Buling thought for a while, went back to the house to get his sword, and went to Mrs. Lu's residence. The prince is very fierce. Author, Guan Guan Gong Zi. Chapter 280. As Tang Jiao made many moves in the capital, the matter of the 10 martial champions was finally settled. On the 8th day of May, a competition was held at Zhuolang Bay on the banks of the Wei River outside the city to fight against Situ Yueming, the second in command of Qin Renmin. Although it was the selection of the 10 martial champions, this matter did not cause much of a stir in Chang'an City. After all, the reputations of the two in the martial arts world were not very good. Many people also hoped that Eunuch Qiu would come out and fight Tang Xiao, which would be exciting. However, this was naturally rejected by the court. The court wanted the Tang family to set an example, not to make a fool of themselves. In addition, Chang'an City was very peaceful, even silent, as if everything was peaceful and everything was fine, but some people who smelled the ominous omen understood that this was the last quiet time before the storm that swept the whole world. Only a small group of people could smell the clues, and Xiao Qi, the eldest daughter of the Huainan Xiao family, was one of them. However, Miss Xiao has been devastated by the storm once, and her mental state has not been very good recently. In addition to paying attention to various subtle changes in the court, she also has to pay attention to Su Buling, the key to this storm. Since helping her sister go out to play and getting herself involved last time, Xiao Qi has not entered the palace again. After a brief conversation with Su Buling at the family dinner, she has not seen Su Buling again. Su Buling's words "see the mountain as a mountain" made Xiao Qi think about a lot of things, but she was not sure whether Su Buling said this casually or had other deep meanings. If he deliberately reminded her, Su Buling must have seen through the overall situation, even more deeply than she did. But Su Buling's recent movements are too ordinary. It seems that he has not felt the overall situation around him at all. He has no preparation to deal with it. He even has the mind to accompany his master out of the city for a stroll, and was forced to poison by others. Xiao Qi has been good at calculating people's hearts since she was a child. Once she feels that she can't see through a person, there are only two possibilities. Either that person is really ordinary and people can't see more things. Or maybe he hid it too well and acted too realistically. Xiao Qi naturally wanted to believe that Su Buling was the latter. After all, he licked her from head to toe. If he was just a reckless and brainless mediocre person who could only write poetry, it would be too annoying. But Xiao Qi had raised the dragon-locking goo when she was a child and had studied it, knowing that this poisonous goo was incurable. Now the storm is coming, and his life is almost gone without any preparation, and he looks like he is waiting to die. It doesn't seem that he hid it too well. With this idea, Xiao Qi observed carefully for a few days, but unfortunately, before she could see anything, her disappointing sister started to ask Su Buling to enter the palace again. As for what to do in the palace, Xiao Qi felt at once, how could she not understand? Since there is no way to kill Su Buling, and there is no way to castrate him and send him to the palace, then this kind of thing must not continue. If it is discovered, it will be terrible. So, on the day when Su Buling entered the palace, Xiao Qi also called a carriage to go to Chang'an Palace directly. On the 3rd day of May, the eve of the Dragon Boat Festival, a heavy rain fell in Chang'an City. Amid the thunder, the rain washed away the hot weather of the past few days. In the main hall of Chang'an Palace, the Queen Mother sat alone on the soft couch, carefully fixing her hair and makeup in front of a small bronze mirror. Even though she knew that her current mood was not right, she could not restrain her instinctive impatience. Since the first detoxification of Su Buling, the Queen Mother basically met with Su Buling once every few days, and then there would be a few more strokes on the small mahogany card she carried with her. At the beginning, the Queen Mother only had resistance and matter-of-factness in her heart, and even a little fear, because the night of detoxification was too difficult to endure, and she would do many things she didn't want to do. She felt humiliated and ashamed, but she had to endure it until she was dizzy and lost the ability to resist, like a fish on a chopping board for you to pick. The Queen Mother always remembered her original intention that Su Buling was a person who cared about the world. She sacrificed her life to save Su Buling for the sake of the world, and then committed suicide after saving him. She was not ashamed of anyone. But since the kiss on the ferry bridge and the night she exchanged identities with her sister and stayed free, she found that her thoughts had changed a little. She began to hate the identity of the Queen Mother and always imagined how good it would be if she was free. This idea was obviously wrong. She was the Queen Mother of Dayu and should not have any feelings for Su Buling anyway. Reason made her suppress this thought tightly. In the dead of night, instinct overwhelmed reason again, making her toss and turn and unable to sleep. She wanted to die and end it all, but the poison had not been completely detoxified and she couldn't die. Especially after leaving the summer resort, the Queen Mother did not detoxify Su Buling again. More than 20 days passed, and the wooden sign still said, "Upright and upright." The Queen Mother was not anxious, nor should she be anxious, but less than 10 days had passed, and after the intervals had exceeded the previous times, the Queen Mother discovered something was wrong. She didn't know what was wrong with her. She couldn't sleep at night, and her heart was as anxious as a cat scratching. She thought Su Buling was coming when she heard the slightest movement. She restrained herself rationally, and even scolded herself, "Shame on you," but she couldn't help it. She heard a few days ago that Su Buling's poison was difficult to suppress, and he suffered from the pain of thousands of ants gnawing at his heart day and night in the mansion. She couldn't control herself anymore. She was not anxious, but painful. She could obviously help detoxify, so how could she let Su Buling suffer there? She realized that her sister might have guessed something, but she didn't care so much. She had no excuse to go to the Prince Su's mansion, so she risked her sister's suspicion and handed a note to Su Buling to come. She thought Su Buling would be impatient and come on the same day, so that he would not be tortured by the dragon-locking goo, but as a result, that guy didn't even enter the palace even though he was suffering from the poisonous hair of dragon-lock goo. Even if it's just to cover up, you can still make excuses, such as it's cooler in the palace, the cold will subside after dusk, etc. You can find any excuse and come over. The Queen Mother didn't know how she resisted. In the past few days, Su Buling could open her eyes and Su Buling could close her eyes. She always imagined the scene of Su Buling rolling around in the room with his hair turning livid and his face hurt. This was because I was worried that Su Buling would die. It was not out of personal love, so I couldn't restrain myself with reason. I felt as distressed as if my favorite object had been broken when I was a child. Fortunately, God was kind, and it finally rained and the weather became cool, so Su Buletinling was able to take the opportunity to enter the palace. After hearing the news that Su Buling had arrived, the Queen Mother could no longer maintain her usual dignified atmosphere. She felt like she was going crazy. Her hands and feet were not working, and her brain was not working. She just sat in front of the bronze mirror and dressed up, even her hair and clothes. She didn't want any flaws in her skirt. Only in this way could she rush out of Changal Palace without losing her composure. Finally, after an unknown amount of time, the sound of footsteps could be heard in the corridor outside the palace. Tap tap tap. The Queen Mother's apricot eyes widened suddenly, and her breathing became rapid. She knew she couldn't show her anxious posture, but she still couldn't hold it back. She stood up and ran quickly outside the main hall, looking impatiently at the woman in a black dress on the veranda. Xiao Qi walked slowly with her hands folded on her waist. "What are you doing here?" The Queen Mother was immediately annoyed and couldn't help but say this. Xiao Qi's eyes were slightly cold, knowing that she had disturbed her sister's fun show, and there was a bit of displeasure on her beautiful face. Why don't I come to visit you?" The Queen Mother stamped her feet angrily, and her brother arrived immediately. The quail eggs were disinfected, she was also wearing his favorite red lotus Tibetan carp, even the palace maids opened their arms. But after all, she couldn't talk about the detoxification. The Queen Mother's chest rose and fell several times, and she almost held back tears. Finally, she gritted her teeth, looked dignified and steady, and nodded slightly. "It's raining so heavily. What should I do if I get sick from dizziness? Oh, I'm worried." This sentence was said with real gritted teeth and a touching smile. Xiao Qi had already seen everything and wanted to go up and swell her sister's butt with a ruler, but she couldn't tell her about it. If she did, her sister wouldn't be able to live. At the moment, she could only act like she used to be intimate and walk closer. He pinched the Queen Mother's cheek. "You have some conscience. I saw that you had nothing to do in the palace, and I became worried about Prince Su's illness. I came to see you." The Queen Mother was in trouble and couldn't tell her story. She and Xiao Qi came to the main hall and sat down. After thinking about it for a while, suddenly an idea flashed that she could let her sister stay in the palace and go out with Su Buling. Thinking of this, the Queen Mother's eyes showed some earnestness, and she smiled calmly and said, "I've been really bored lately with nothing to do. Prince Su is a junior, so it's natural for him to care about him. Do you still know that you are a junior?" Xiao Qi held back her anger and humiliation, her expression was calm. She picked up the teacup and took a sip. "Really?" The Queen Mother nodded slightly, sat a little closer, and hugged Xiao Qi's arm. "Sister, the Dragon Boat Festival is coming soon. I heard that the scenery outside is very beautiful. Prince Su and I are quite familiar, he calls Hongluan auntie. Hongluan and I have the best relationship, so we are very familiar with him. Come to Changal Palace today. There seems to be nothing to see. How about you help me stay in the palace for one night while I go out?" "You think beautifully." Xiao Qi got angry when she heard this. If it weren't for her sister's bad idea, how could she have been licked clean by that damn boy? She still takes baths several times a day. It's raining heavily outside. What's there to see? Aren't you afraid that thunder will kill you too? The Queen Mother asked the Sanking Taoist whether she wanted to save the world, so she was naturally not afraid of this. "Sister, are you kidding me? Why did lightning strike me? I didn't do anything wrong, I went out to watch the rain and I will be back tomorrow morning." Just stay in the palace and don't want to go anywhere. Xiaoqi slowly sipped her tea, looking like she had no need to discuss it. The Queen Mother pursed her lips. If she said anything more, she might make her sister suspicious, so she had to stop talking angrily. After a while, footsteps were heard outside the door again, and the palace maid reported at the door. Queen Mother, the young prince is here. The Queen Mother tensed up. She was a little excited at first, but when she saw Xiaoqi next to her, there was only disappointment in her eyes. Xiaoqi's heart also tightened slightly, but she didn't show off her extraordinary intelligence. She just sat upright and waited quietly.